Hi everyone, I am Barb Binder with Rocky Mountain Training, and I want to welcome you to the first Learning to Use Adobe FrameMaker webinar in 2023. This one is on working with numbering properties. Before I get started, here's just a little bit about my background. As I said, I'm Barb Binder with Rocky Mountain Training. We are based outside of Denver, Colorado. We deliver training classes on the Adobe Creative Suite applications and the Technical Communication Suite applications. I am personally responsible for teaching the InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, Acrobat, and FrameMaker classes. I also volunteer time as an Adobe community expert on the community forums, and I've been a certified instructor since 1997. I've been using and teaching FrameMaker since 1992. If you would like to stay in touch after the webinar, you are welcome to get a screen grab of this information. You've got my email and my website. Classes are listed on the website. But perhaps more importantly, you'll have access to my blog, which is a compilation of questions students have asked me after class since 2009. So I have years and years of questions and answers from my students on FrameMaker and the other applications that I teach. You also might want to bookmark the Adobe Community Forum page. This is a forum hosted by Adobe, and there are a lot of us who volunteer as community experts to answer questions. If you spend any time there at all, you've probably seen me swing by to help answer questions, maybe one of yours or somebody else's. I try to stop by most days, as do a lot of us. It's really the quickest place to get an answer to any question, whether it has to do with structured FrameMaker or unstructured FrameMaker, or that has to do with this webinar or just FrameMaker in general. There are a lot of us who are waiting to answer your questions on the forums. Please take advantage of that resource. So the plan for the next hour or so is to cover numbering properties. This is a topic that confounds a lot of users. I'd like to cover this in segments. First, the interface and the concepts of numbering properties. Then a simple example of how to add text and bullets as auto numbers. Then we'll look at defining basic lists, both numeric lists and alphanumeric lists. We'll take a look at the role of a series label in a FrameMaker document, and then we're going to pull it all together and see how to take all this information to number a technical document. That's the plan. Now, I've got a lot to cover, and I will be moving relatively quickly. Please remember that this is a recorded webinar. It will be posted after it's presented the first time on YouTube. You'll be able to watch it as many times as you want, and you can pause and listen to sections again and again if necessary. Some of the things in numbering get a little complicated. You might want to plan on hearing things more than once if this is brand new to you today. Okay, let's see what's next. So let's begin with a quick orientation to the interface that I'll be using over the next hour. We're going to spend most of our time in the Paragraph Designer looking at numbering properties and their possibilities. I'll also spend a bit of time, though, in basic properties, because as I'm setting up my numbering, I may need to change my first line indent. That's going to impact the first line of a paragraph. My left indent, which in FrameMaker targets the second and subsequent lines of a paragraph, and my tab stops. Tabs are often added after a bullet character, perhaps after an auto number. And if you want to hang an indent where the second and subsequent lines tuck in under the tab, the trick is to make sure that your tab value is set to the exact same number as your left indent, and it should be a left-aligned tab. So that L indicates a left-aligned tab at a 1/2 inch, and this is showing my left indent at a 1/2 inch. I'll talk about it the first time I do it. After that, I'll just do it relatively quickly, because we want to focus on all the auto number choices. Now, here are the components of the numbering properties. You can turn auto numbers on and off with the checkbox that you see on the first line. You build your expression on the format line right here. It can be a combination of text, punctuation, spaces, and building blocks. The building blocks we typically use are listed here, although there's some others you might choose to incorporate, like end spaces and end spaces if you wanted to use those. You can control the position of the auto number, and typically for most of us it goes at the beginning of a paragraph. But I work with equations, and equations have numbers on the right side typically. So I can open up this drop-down menu and I can choose position end of paragraph. for my equations, and that way all my other auto numbers are at the beginning of the paragraphs, but my equation numbers are at the end of the paragraphs. And then you can apply character styles to your auto number formats, and I'll show you all these things as we go. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead over to FrameMaker, and let me show you the most basic, easiest way to start using auto numbers. So my cursor is sitting here on this first paragraph. It's using a style that's called AL Alert. Over here you can see AL Alert, and none of the auto numbering has been turned on yet. So the first thing I'd need to do is type in auto number paragraphs, and the second thing I do is type in what I want to appear at the beginning of that paragraph. I'm going to put caps lock on and type in alert, ALERT, colon, space, and then I'm simply going to pick update style. And that word is going to appear automatically at the beginning of that line, any place that I'm using that paragraph style. If I come down here and think that's another alert, I want to make the word alert appear there, I can assign it. I can come down here and assign it again. And it's built into my style now. So if I ever say, that's not really an alert, it's a body begin, I can take it off, or I can put it back on again. It's that simple. And as I mentioned, you can assign a character format to these. So if I drop the list down, I'm going to see the character styles that are listed in my character catalog over here. There's one called EM emphasis, which will help this stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and choose EM emphasis, and I'll update my style. And that makes those words pop out to get someone's attention so that they can look at that. We see alert boxes, but we also see other words. Sometimes I'll see the word notes appearing. Let's type it in all caps again so you can see it easily. Notes, space, update style. You might have caution or any other words you want to apply. That's a very basic use of auto number properties without having to know anything else about how the building blocks work. Now I'm going to remove those by just clicking on those paragraphs and returning them back to body begin. And let's move on to a second example that starts to use the building blocks, but still very easy to wrap your head around. When you have a list, and let's say, for example, this is a list of 5 items, and you want to make it look more like a list, you might add bullets or you might add numbers. Let's start with the bullets. I'm going to begin by creating a new paragraph style up here, and I'm going to call it just L1, keep the typing to a minimum. L1. Sorry, caps lock is still on. L, there we go. 1. And then I'm going to create my style. And I'll turn auto number properties or auto number paragraphs on. And then I'm going to start to use these building blocks. Now, the building blocks list is not very friendly if you're brand new to it. It's not bad once you understand how it works. That's my job during this hour, to explain how these building blocks work. But the one building block that's recognizable to a new student is the bullet building block. If I click on bullet, it's going to add a bullet right up here. And when I update my style, it's going to add a bullet in front of each of those paragraphs that are using the style called L1. Now, we're definitely going to want to have space after that bullet. And you might be tempted to put a spacebar space in there. But if you have a multi-line bullet that wraps to the second and third lines, if you put a space there, they're not going to line up. So you really need to come back to your format and add the tab character. The tab character is the \T, and when I add it to the end of that line, I'm saying to FrameMaker, okay, I'd like to have a bullet and a tab character at the beginning, at the start of every one of these paragraphs. When I pick update style, it actually looks worse, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see what that looks like, because FrameMaker is now adding the greater than symbol between the bullet and the text. The greater than symbol is FrameMaker's text symbol for a tab. I do recommend that you always work with your text symbols on. I know a lot of my students will turn text symbols off, and then they can't tell why something is working or not. And if they ask me questions about it and you can't see the text symbols, I have to ask them, what's happening between the bullet and the text? If you keep the text symbols showing, there's no guesswork there. You can see, okay, there's a tab there. Now, once that tab is there, you have to format this, and that's where I'm going to Basic Properties. I want to set up a hanging indent. So I'm going to go to Basic Properties, and I'm going to change 3 things here. I'm going to give myself a first line indent of 1/4 inch. When I pick Update Style, that's going to indent the first line of all those paragraphs 1/4 inch in. I'm then going to set a left indent here to 0.5, and I'm going to set a tab stop at that exact same location. So I'll click on Edit, I'll type in a 1/2 inch, 0.5 inches, make sure it's set to left, continue, and then update style. Now you might think that wasn't very helpful to have a left line indent because these are all really short entries. But if I click on this longer one and realize that's part of my list, and I assign it the L1, you can see what that left indent is actually doing for you over here. This 1/2 inch is targeting the second and subsequent lines, and the tab stop and the left indent are both at 1/2 inch, so these are lining up exactly. That's the idea. Now, when you're evaluating the tab stop and thinking, is that enough? Do you like it or not? I think that's when it's okay to go to the view menu and hide your text symbols and just see if that looks all right. But then I highly encourage you to turn them back on again while you're working. It just removes the mystery of why things are spacing down or spacing across. You can see those symbols, it's that much easier. So that's basic bullets. If I want to use them again, I can come down and select more paragraphs and just assign the L1 style, and they're going to do the exact same thing. Now, because of the way numbering properties is set up, where Adobe FrameMaker is offering us a single character for the bullet, people think that's all you can do. And you can use other characters. You can pick one just off the keyboard. For example, I know some people will use a hyphen. So I'm just replacing that bullet with a hyphen and picking update style. And now I've got hyphens on all my bullets. That's a possibility. Or you can use character styles to change the font. So I happen to have a font, a character style in here that's called Wingdings. And let me just show you what it looks like. If I grab a couple of lines up here and I say to use Wingdings, it's going to change those to ornaments. Now, Wingdings happens to have a couple of characters that I might want to use for my bullets. For example, there's a diamond character and there's a box. So take a look at those two characters, the diamonds and the box. To take off my character style, I'm going to go back to default paragraph font. And it just so happens that that T is a solid diamond. So if I come back over here and I change my format from the hyphen, let's get rid of that hyphen, click, get my cursor there, there we go, backspace, put a letter T in there, and I update style, I get a bunch of T's. That looks awful. But if I change my character style to Wingdings, and I update my style, now I'm going to get those diamonds. And there are other letters that you might consider using. For example, the letter N is a possibility. That's going to be the little box if I update the style. Or I could have the letter O, update style. And you're starting to see that you have more possibilities. I'm going to go ahead and go with the little box, which is the lowercase n when the font is set to Wingdings, and update style. And then I just want to show you how to create a nested bullet list. So I'm going to select two of these items, and let's say that these represent a subset of this C configuration. They don't, but just pretend that for a minute. So I'll go over here, I'll make a new style. I will call it L2, and I'll create the style. Then I'm going to go back to basic and just increase all my indents here. So I'll have a first line indent of a 1/2 inch. I'll have a left indent of 0.75 inches. I'll have a tab stop at 0.75, remembering that we want to make sure 0.75 that the left indent and the tab stop are at the exact same location, so that when I update my style, they'll move together. And then I can go back to numbering, and maybe I think the T would be a good choice here to have diamonds. Update style. And you can see now I've got a nested list. And if you have sub-lists and sub-sub-lists, you just keep increasing the indents and you keep changing the bullet character. And then once you have them, you just assign them. So if I want to assign it to these two now, I can come over here and hit L2. And there we go. And then to see how this looks without the text symbols showing, I'll go to the View menu. I'll hide the text symbols. And that's what we've come up so far using auto number properties. Okay, so let's build on that information and move into actual numbers. In FrameMaker, the numbers are controlled by the counter values, and a counter is a placeholder that represents a number or a letter. The counters are going to appear in angled brackets like you see right here, And each counter is initially set to 0 at the beginning of each flow. You can have more than one counter on the auto number format line. And it's this ability to mix and match the building blocks that allows me to have said to all my students over the past 30 years that yes, we can set up that particular numbering style that you're working with in FrameMaker. I believe I've hit this twice in my career, once this year. There have been 2 jobs where we can't use auto numbers in FrameMaker because the numbers aren't sequential. I forget the problem with the first example, but the one that happened this year is for a client who is referencing regulations that are controlled outside of her domain. And there are gaps in the numbers. They can add more regulations in later. In that environment, the numbers aren't sequential. So those have to be put in manually. But in terms of any other numbering situation I've ever been shown in my entire training career in FrameMaker, I've never had to say, no, you can't do that in FrameMaker. You can do any numbering you want to. And while there's definitely a bit of a learning curve, understanding how these building blocks work and the counters work, the beauty of FrameMaker is that you can mix and match these building blocks into any combination to get exactly what you're looking for. It's very powerful, very easy to control. So there are 5 basic placeholders within FrameMaker: the lowercase n, the lowercase a, the uppercase a, the lowercase r, and the uppercase r. And those particular placeholders represent, in the case of the n's, Arabic numerals, or lowercase alphabetic lists, uppercase alphabetic lists, lowercase Roman numeral lists, and then uppercase Roman numeral lists. And they show up in FrameMaker in groups of 3. They always follow the same pattern. For example, the n shows up as an n plus, n equals 1, a plus, a equals 1, all the way down. I want to go over those with you first. There are some special counters I'll get into as well. Let's save that for a little bit and just work on the basic counters. And again, with that knowledge, let's go set up a list. And I'm going to select these 5 items. Last time we set them up as bullets. This time we're going to set them up as a numbered list. So again, I'm going to go ahead and make a new paragraph style for this. L1 for list level 1, but I'm going to minimize the typing. So L1, and I'll create the style. Then I'll turn on auto number paragraphs, and I'll look at the building blocks. Now, here is that letter N, and as I said, it comes in a group of 3, n plus, n equals 1. The other ones show up beyond that. Let's just start with the n's. And if I want to have an incremented list that starts with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I would use the n plus building block. And when I pick update style, that's exactly what happens. Now, we do need some space, and I can add space by adding a tab character. I've already covered that, so I'll update the style. I don't have my text symbols on, so let's go ahead and show my text symbols again, so you can see that it's in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and set up my indents again. So I'm going to hop over to basic properties, just give myself the same basic indents. I want a 1/4 inch for the first line of all those. I want a 1/2 inch for the left indent. That's the second and subsequent line. I need the matching value for my tab stop. It should be a left align tab. So left align, 0.5, continue, update style. And that looks better. Now I've got my list working here. Once it looks good, I want to go back to numbering and then explain a little bit more about how this is working. So the counter value, as I said, starts out with a value of 0 for each flow. This is flow A. This is the top of the document. So in my head, because I think visually, there's a little 0 up here. That's how the counter value starts. And what the n plus building block is going to do is examine the current counter, which starts at 0. And then it adds 1 to it and displays the results. So that's why I have a 1 here. +1 is 2, +1 is 3, +1 is 4, +1 is 5. There are additional building blocks that use the n that I'll get to in just a minute. There's just the n and then the n equals 1. They both have their uses. But when you're looking at a numbered list, you want the list to increment by 1. And so that n plus is the building block to use. Now, in terms of the other variations on these placeholders, there are lowercase a's. And what I'm going to do to show you what that looks like is just erase the n and type in a. And I'm showing you here that you can not only click the building blocks, you can also just type in there if you want to, if you know them in your head. When I change that to a lowercase a and I update style, I now get an alphanumeric list. It's a list that's numbering with A, B, C, D. And as I scroll down through this list just a little bit, you'll see the uppercase A's appear. Let me just replace that lowercase a with an uppercase A and update style. I now get the uppercase alphanumeric list. If I scroll down a little bit more, I'll get into the R group. Let me change that A to a lowercase r, which, as I said, stands for lowercase Roman, update style. And then I'll change it to an uppercase R, update style. Did I update it? I don't think I updated it. That time I did. Okay, update style. You can always add punctuation whenever you want. So if you would rather have a period after that, you could choose a period and it would put it right in there. The trick on working with the building blocks is you need to work around the building blocks. Don't get in the middle of them. Don't get in between the R and the plus and try to type something that's going to break it. Just make sure you're on the outside of the building blocks and add anything you want. So that's pretty easy. Now, I think maybe it would look a little bit nicer since these represent steps to follow. If I have Arabic numerals, put the lowercase n back in, and then I'm going to add the word step, and I'm going to put in a colon, and I'll put the tab back in again. It's at the very top. I can type it in or I can just click it, and update style. Now that restores my Arabic numerals. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 again. I've added step at the beginning. I've added the colon at the end, but my tab stops don't work anymore. So here I go back to basic properties, and I'm just going to change my left indent to 0.8. I think that will be enough. If I change my left indent, I have to also change my left align tab. Let's see if that's going to work. 8, continue. And then update style. That looks good. And I'll test it on this paragraph, which isn't technically part of the list, but it does have a second line, so I can see how my hanging indent looks. Yep, that works great. So you're seeing how I'm just using auto numbering in conjunction with my indents to set up a list that looks nice. Now, if I want it to stand out, I have the option of applying a character style again. When I update style, it applies a character style, and there's just barely enough space for me to get away with that. I might turn off my text symbols and double check. Yeah, that's enough. So I'll leave it there and put my text symbols back on again. Now, if I come down to this group down here and I assign that same style, I'm going to get into trouble because FrameMaker is going to do exactly what we tell it to do. And that style says to increment the numbers. So what's happening is since this last style in my first list ends with a 6, the next time it sees an n plus, it says, well, 6 plus 1 is 7. It's going to keep incrementing. And if I go to the next page and I have more items in my list and I choose list 1, it's going to keep incrementing. That's just how FrameMaker works. So there are 2 different approaches to reset your lists. Either one is appropriate. Let me show you the one I see most in my students' documentations, and I'll show you another way that might work for you as well. You can decide. But a typical way that I see my students handling this within their templates that they've been developed before I came along is they'll use a second style. And so right now, step 1 is using a style called L1, and it's set to N plus, which means increment that number. I could add another style, and I'll just call it L1 restart, meaning restart the list. Spelling is not my strong suit, so restart, there we go. Create the style. And then I can change the building block. If I change this N plus, and I'm going to just highlight it, so you can see me clicking it down here to N equals 1, that's a different instruction for list 1 restart. When I update my style, it doesn't change this one because it was already a 1. But if I come down here and I click on step 7 and say, you're a list 1 restart, it's going to reset that counter value to 1. So take a look at this again for just a sec. This particular paragraph is using list 1 restart. The instruction is set the counter value to 1 and show the results. This one is not using it. This one's using n plus, and that is saying continue incrementing the counter. When I get to the next page, the problem with this one is that it's incrementing the counter. It's using the n plus. I have to say, no, I've got a new style for you. List 1 restart. And when I turn that on, now it resets it at 1. So that's one way you can approach this. There's another way to do this, though, and I'm going to undo these steps. I think I can undo back that far. So undo, 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 undo. There we go. So now I'm back to the incrementing lists. And here is another way to approach this. If in your documentation you have a paragraph that always appears before every single list, always, not often, but always appears, you can actually use that paragraph to reset the list. And in this document, I have a heading 3 above all my lists, and I have a body begin above all my lists. Neither of those appears in the middle of a list. They appear above the lists and then elsewhere in the document where there aren't any lists. But that's going to be consistent across this document. So knowing that, I can actually leverage one of those paragraphs to do the work for me. I'm going to click on Body Begin, and I'm going to tell Body Begin to reset the list. So if I go to Body Begin and I turn on Auto Number Formats and I click N+, I don't mean N+, and I click N equals 1 to set the list back to 1, and I update style, it changes things, but not in a good way. Let me show you some things to keep an eye on. First of all, I've got a 1 right here, and I've got a 1 right there, because n equals 1 is saying set the counter to 1 and show the result. So that's what's happening. Plus, it's setting the counter to 1, and that means that each of my lists, while they are resetting, are starting at 2. So I got to make a couple changes to Body Begin. First of all, I'm going to say, I don't want 1, I want a 0. N equals 0. And when I update style, you're starting to see it work. With the counter set to 0, visibly at the beginning of each of these paragraphs, the lists are resetting themselves now. So each list is resetting themselves. And that's cool. But I don't want anybody to know what I'm doing. This is my secret, or our secret. And so I'm going to use a special counter. This is back on my other screen. The first special counter is that space that you see here. It's just a space in the brackets. The space can do things for you, but not show the results. It happens in the background. So now I'm going to pop back over to FrameMaker. And with my cursor still on the Body Begin paragraph, I'm going to change that N, which produces the the Arabic numeral 1 or 0, to a space. So now that says less than space equals 0 greater than. And the space is going to do the work, but not tell anybody. So as long as that paragraph appears before my lists, I can have that paragraph reset the lists for me, which I like because it's automatic. I don't have to remember to assign the list restart style. Again, either way is fine. Most of my students' documents, when I get involved with their files and helping them with their own specific work, they're using 2 styles for their lists, and they remember. But if you don't have to, I think it's that much better. Okay, so that's my first trick. And now let's talk about nested lists. So we talked about nested bullets, where you just increase the indents and then you add the bullets. Let's do that now. I'm going to select these 2 items, and let's say that they are a subset of this, and I want to have them indented. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new style. Again, to keep the typing to a minimum, I'll just call it L2 for L2 list 2. I'll create the style. And I'm going to remove the word step. I don't think I need step. And I don't think I need the colon. So let me get rid of that. And update style. Okay, that looks good. And then I want to indent them. So let me go over here and get basic properties and just increase my indents. So I'll make this one 0.8, and this is going to be 1.1, and this is going to be 1.1, continue, and update style. That'll work. Okay. Now, formatting wise, I'm okay with it, but look what's going on here. When you look at my numbering properties, you can see that this is another n plus, and we just figured out that there's an n plus followed by another n plus. FrameMaker is going to see it and add to the counter value. So this goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what I'm going to do is click next to the n plus right here, and I'm going to make this an alphabetic list. So I'll choose A plus and I'll update style. And that looks incredibly weird because look what I'm telling it to do. I'm saying to increment as the first building block it encounters the n plus. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the second building block is sitting on that line is the alphanumeric list. And I like that. I want to keep the AB, but I don't want to have this going on here. Plus, it's disrupting the next item. So there's another building block that we can use. I'll keep the N just for a minute because it's visible to you. If I delete the plus, then I can use this N building block. And when I update style, it carries the number forward without incrementing it. Let's think about that for a minute. So the counter value, this is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Now the N is carrying that 1 forward. And then that's why this becomes a 2 and a 3 and a 4. If I come down here and I say you're an L2, it's going to carry the 2 forward and then have the letters here. So I'm showing you now the third version of the N building block. Remember there's N, N plus, N equals 1. We've looked at all three now. And I do have some people that number like this. They want 1A and 1B. That's great. It's done. But what if you want that to carry but not show? That's where you get rid of the N and you put that space in again. That space is a special counter that can do a job but hide it. So now when I update style, I get the A and the B in there. If I come down here and I choose L2, it's going to carry it, but not show it. And then the A's and the B's will increment. So pretty straightforward. If you needed a third level, you simply increase the indent and then continue the carry. So let me go ahead and add a third level. Let's say that this is going to be a third level here. So I need to have another style. This time it would be L3, update style, or rather create style. I need to continue the indenting. So this might be 1.1. This might be 1.3. And this might be 1.3. Continue. And update style. Location-wise, that looks great. But then in numbering, I would need to carry. So I'll go space, less than, space, greater than, and then I'll change that A to an I, update style. Got a typo in there. Why do I say I? I don't know. I meant R. Didn't understand. So see what it did when I said I? I'm thinking lowercase Roman. The first character is an I. Okay, that's what happened there. A little logic issue. There we go. Okay. And then you can see now how that's working. Now, if I come back and I say, let's see, that this needs to be a level 1, it's going to go back to a step 1. This might need to be a step 2. So it goes back to a step 2. And each time I get a step 2, it's going to go back to A and B. And then as I add a step 3, now 3, it goes back to Roman numerals. Here we go. Now, I've got a picture of what this looks like because I know it's confusing as we start to get into multiple building blocks on a single line. So I'm going to head back over to my table and look at the next page with you. So here's what's happening. I had 3 styles, L1, L2, and L3. L1 had a step, the word step in front of it, and it just used the N plus building block. That was producing the 1, 2, 3, 4. And then to get the second step, which we want to have appear just the A by itself, we had to carry the counter forward. That's the space here. It's carrying it. It's not incrementing. It's just carrying it. And then show the A. And then for the third level, it's carry, show the lowercase Roman numeral. Okay, let's continue. So the next topic is the role of a series label in a FrameMaker document. A series label is used to differentiate one numbering series from another within the same file. It consists of a single character, that could be a letter or a number or any other character on your keyboard, followed by a colon. And the rule in FrameMaker is that you're allowed to have one unnamed series in a flow. But if you have additional numbering series, you'll need to use the series label to differentiate that next series from the earlier series. For example, looking at this table, you've got possible style names in the left column. L1 list 1 is what we just set up in the previous exercise, but now I'm going to be adding figure titles and table titles that are going to be numbered, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, table 1, table 2, table 3. So these are potential style names. Style names don't matter, call them what you like. And then in the second column, we'll look at the series label. Now again, you're allowed to have one unnamed series in a FrameMaker document. And in the last exercise, all we had was our step series. We had our main steps and our sub steps, but they were all part of the same series. And I got away without talking about series labels because we only had that one series. But now I want to introduce additional numbered series, numbered tables, and numbered lists. They're going to require a series label to differentiate them from the list series. And if we don't do that, they're all going to increment off each other. And we're going to have something that doesn't make any sense at all. They're all going to use the N plus building block. They'll have a word in front, the N plus building block, a tab afterwards. And they should appear like this, where they'll say step 1, step 2, step 3, table 1, table 2, table 3, figure 1, figure 2, figure 3. That's the plan. So back in FrameMaker, what we're seeing here is just a simple list. I'm going to go ahead and select all those list items and go ahead and assign my L1 list 1 style, which is going to format it the way we just set it up in the previous exercise. I'm using the same definition for the auto number paragraphs that we just set up. They number sequentially. That's great. But what if I decide that this text right here isn't really a step? It actually represents a figure caption. When I go over and I click on figure caption, it's going to add the word figure, and I also have it changing the color just so you can keep track of these as I add more onto the page. But you can see that FrameMaker thinks that it's going to be figure 2, even though it's the first time I've used this style, because it's using the N plus building block. And 1 plus 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. I'll have the same situation happen if I come over and I assign my table caption style. Now it's going to add the word table because that's part of the style, but I'm using that N plus building block, and so it's just adding to them. So what do? We use a series label to differentiate them from each other. Now, I'm allowed to have one unnamed series, and I didn't put a series label on step in the previous exercise. I'll leave it off here. But I'm going to go to the first figure, and I'm going to go to the front of the auto number paragraphs format line. And I'm going to type in a capital F and a colon, and then I'm going to update the style. Now, that simple addition of a series label is telling FrameMaker that the figure series is separate from anything else in the document. It automatically gets assigned a 1. If I come along at the end of that paragraph and I add a few more, enter, 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 it's incrementing those separately than the other items on this page. If I go to the table style and I just press enter, 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 it still thinks that that's part of the step series. You can see it says step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then step 7, because I didn't put a series label in yet. If I come over here and I add my series label to the beginning, a T colon, in this case, T for table, and I update the style, it now knows that that's a separate series. And once that's in the document, these will now number as 3 separate series whenever I use them. So if I come along up here and I say that these are a few more steps, enter, 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 I get my steps. If I come along in here and I think, these are actually steps, these two, there we go, and I assign the list style, they're going to number sequentially 4, 5, 6, and you can see the figures are just jumping right over it and continuing to increment. As I add more figures, that's working. If I come in here and decide that these two are actually steps, then the tables will just increment correctly, and as I add more steps, they increment correctly. So I'm able to use these series labels to differentiate between the 3 separate numbering series that are in this one document. Now, as a final step, and this is completely optional, you can use a series label for the steps. You don't need to because you're allowed one unnamed series, but if you want to be consistent, you could add a series label. So if I come to the beginning of my step series and I then type in a capital S and a colon, again, the letter doesn't matter. I'm using S for step because that's what makes sense to me. And I update style, nothing changes. It was already understood to be a separate series because it didn't have a label. But for consistency's sake, I now have my step series and I have my figure series and I have my table series. They're all incrementing correctly. There's no confusion. As I assign and reassign styles, everything simply renumbers. And the beauty of the FrameMaker building blocks is while the learning curve is a little steeper than in other applications, once you get the logic worked out, they always work. You really can't break them if you get this logic worked out. Okay, so now it's time to pull all of this together and see if we can number a technical document the way so many of them are put together. Keep in mind, you can mix and match these building blocks in any way. So this isn't perfect for you. Hopefully you've picked up enough logic that you can make it work. If you can't, you can always ask us on the Adobe FrameMaker community forum. There's a bunch of us who do a lot of numbering and are always happy to answer those questions. But let me go ahead and show you how I would approach the numbering from here. I do want to say that this little table that I'm using on this page was meant to help you visualize how to set up the series label and what it would look like. But this is not much information. I can carry this in my head. I don't need to draw a table. When I get into more serious table numbering requests, I will sketch out a table like this on a piece of paper, sometimes on a whiteboard, wherever I am, I'll sketch it out because it helps me get the logic right the first time. So what I'll do is I'll ask my students what styles they have, how they want the numbering to look, and that will give me the answer to how to fill this out. And then once this is filled out, it's a pretty easy process to be able to go to FrameMaker and just implement it. So let's take a look at what I've got here. The first column has sample style names. Your style names are however they're written. It doesn't matter what the names are. But in this particular document, it has 4 heading levels. Heading 0 is a chapter title, and then there's heading 1, 2, and 3. Those are the next 3 level headings. I want to have numbers on all those. And I also want to have numbers on the table captions, so above my tables, and on my figure captions, so around my figures. Look at the series labels. All the headings need to be the same series for them to increment correctly. I'm going to use H: for my heading series, and I'm using it for all 4 heading levels. I'm going to switch the series label, though, when it comes to the table captions and the figure captions. I'll use T: for table and F: for figure, as I said in the last exercise, because that makes sense to me. The next column is showing you what I want to type into the auto number format text box. For my top level heading, I want the word chapter and then the chapter num. I want a colon, and then the SN is an N space. It's a slightly wider space than pressing the space bar. It's my preference for spacing out the numbers, but it also means I can avoid messing with the hanging indents because that's a lot of time talking about indents again. You've gotten that figured out. So let's focus on the numbering and not worry about indenting. You can always implement the indents I've talked about earlier for any list. It works the same way for all of them. Now, in my last column, here's what I'm hoping to get. I want my documents to be numbered chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, . So that's my goal. And then let's look at the next 3. So for the second row, this is the heading 1, second level headings. I want the chapter number, followed by a period, followed by the incremental counter. and then the SN. That's going to produce this 1.1, where the first one represents the chapter number, and then the N plus represents the first heading 1 plus 1 to the second heading 1 to the third to the fourth. So it'll look like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. When I get to the next level heading, this is that third row right in here. I always want the chapter number. I'll have that every single time. So then I'm more focused on these next columns. I want to hold the heading 1 number. I don't want to increase it. I want to hold it. At the heading 2, I have just the N by itself. Then I want to have the incremental counter for that heading level, so it will increase, followed by the N space. And that's going to give me the result you see to the right. The first heading 2 is going to be 1.1.1, where the first one is a chapter number, the second one is the heading 1 number, and the third one is the first heading 2. The second will be 1.1.2 and then 1.1.3, because that last number is incrementing. And then this one just continues that logic. I want the chapter number, I want to hold, and then I want to increment. So I've got chap num period, N period, N period, N plus with my N space. And the 1.1.1.1 represents the first one is a chapter number, the next one is the first heading 1, and then the heading 2, and then the heading 3. And then that last number is going to increment. If there's 3 heading 3s, 1.1.1.1, 1.1.1.2, 1.1.1.3. And then they will just continue through the document doing that same thing as they increase. Now the logic switches back and simplifies when we come to the table and the figure captions. I just want to have the series label for each of those. I want to have the correct wording. I want the chapter number, and I want it to increment. And because they have their own series label, these N pluses are not going to be confused with any other N pluses in the document. They're going to be right there. And that's going to give me my table 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and my figure 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. Okay, so let's see if we can put this into FrameMaker. So I'm going to switch back over to FrameMaker, and I have a book open. I'm going to reorganize ever so slightly so you can see my book. There we go. I'm going to hold my Shift key, go to the File menu, remembering that that's a great shortcut. If you're in your book, Shift File, a great shortcut to open all the files in the book. And they're all going to open up in the correct order running across. Okay. So I have 3 chapters in this document. Chapter 1 is general description. There's also operating limitations and then systems. I don't have any numbering in any of these files right now. None of them have the numbering. So I'll discuss how to get it in there, but I'm going to work on the general description file. I want to get this to work, and if it does, then I can just copy those choices over to the other files. Now, what I've done here is what I do in my own work as well. I have just typed in some sample paragraphs to put the numbering on. You don't want to watch me put numbering and then have to scroll through the document and find the next occurrence and put numbering on and then the next occurrence. That's a lot of scrolling and trying to figure out where I am. So to simplify it for you and for me, I've just typed in sample headings up here. There's a sample heading 1, a sample heading 2, a sample heading 3, and then there's also a sample table title and a sample figure title. None of these have numbering on. They all need it. So I'll start at the top. I'm going to go to my heading 0, and I'm going to go to numbering properties. This is part of the heading series, so I would implement auto numbers, and I would just start typing from here. I'll use H colon as my series label. I want the word chapter. Did I get it turned? Oh, I moved my mouse. Sorry. Okay, let me try that again. Here. Okay. H colon chapter. And then I need to scroll down to locate the special building blocks. Remember I had 5 on that first slide. That's the one that has a space. But then there are 4 additional building blocks that are relatively easy to understand. There's a volume number, a chapter number, section number, and subsection number. I'm looking for the chapter number. I'm going to go ahead and click it now and put my colon and my space in. But let me just come back and mention volume numbers are going to collect can collect a series of books. You might have a volume that has 4 books. So you can use the volume number for a collection of books. If you're using hierarchical books, it's a hard word for me to say, you can use section and subsection numbers. So books within books, you can use sections and subsections. They're all available for you at any time, and they all work basically the same way. Okay, so I've got H: chapter, space, chap num. It's all there. I'll update the style. And I've got the first part done. Then I'm going to come on to my next one. This is my heading 1, next level heading. I want to turn on auto numbers. I need to use the same series label because I'm still doing the headings. And in this case, I don't want the word chapter, but I do want the chapter number. And then I want a period. And then I want the N+ building block. So it's less than, N plus, greater than. I don't want a period, but I want the N space, which is \SN. And then I'm going to pick update style. You notice that I'm typing this in because scrolling up and down this list while I'm demonstrating takes me longer than I'd like it to. So if I know what the building blocks are, I'll just type them in. It's quicker to type the ends than to go scroll looking for them. But that looks right. So now I'll come down to this one. This is my level 2. And I'm going to turn on auto number formats. I'm still doing a heading, so it's still H:. And I don't want to have the any words. I just want the chapter number, period. Then I want to hold or carry the previous number, the previous counter. So it's less than, N greater than. And that N right there is just going to keep this number right here constant. It's going to carry that number down. And then I want to increment. So that's when I have my N+. So it's N+ greater than, and then I want my N space \SN, update style. Looks good. One more, auto number formats, and I'll type it in, and I want the chapter number, and then I want a period, and then I want to carry the previous level. So that's just the letter N, period. I want to carry again, that's just the letter N, period, and then I want to increment N+, greater than \SN, update style. So it's going to do hold, 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 and then increment. By the way, the chapnum variable does not ever increment within a single file. The chapter number is set for the entire file for the duration of the file. So you increment the chapter numbers when you're at the book, and I'll get there. Anyway, this was easy for me because of that table. Because I took the time to create that table and thought through what has to hold and what has to increment, I can easily set it up. And some documents number 6 levels of headings or even more. If I have that table sitting in front of me, I can be like, okay, I count the N's. I need 6 of those N's. I put them in, and then I hit the N+, and I normally get it right the first time. If I'm doing it in my head and just thinking, I might miscount. Okay. Let's now work on, this is a table caption. So this is not a heading. This is a table caption. What I'm going to do here is put in the T: for the T series label. I do want the word table, and I want a space, and I want the chapter number and a period. I want to increment these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's my N+, and then greater than. And then I'm just going to put in the SN for the N space and update style. I have a typo. I didn't hit the plus, I hit the equals. So I've got to get that out of there and put in a plus. And of course, I could see that immediately because I thought to myself, how did that 0 get in there? That's the first table. It should be a 1. So if I do make a mistake, it's easy to troubleshoot. Update style. That looks better. And then I'll click on the sample figure title. Last time through, this is going to be the figure series. So it's F:, then I want the word figure and a space, and I want the chapter number, and I want a period, and I want the N+, and this time I'll avoid the typos by scrolling, and then I will put in the \SN, which is an N space, update style. And then I'm going to save it because I think it's done. But I have to test it. So if I come down here and I add a second head heading 1. That became a 1.2. That looks great. That rolled to a 2. That rolled to a 2. So those are all rolling correctly. If I add another heading to here, so that's rolling to a 2. That's rolling to a 2. That's all working. If I add another one here, it's a heading 3. They're all incrementing correctly. That looks great. And then I didn't want to have all those other numbers on my table numbers and figure numbers, so I can easily test those just by pressing Enter, Enter. They're incrementing. These two, I think I'm going to need to just press Enter, Enter, and then assign the styles. So let me select them. Harder than it looked. Those are the figures. So figure caption. Yep, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3. Okay, so they're all working. So now I'm going to remove all of that because that was just extra to make it easy for you and for me to set the numbers up and test them. They look good. This mess is just a screen refresh situation. Control L is your friend. I would typically use Control L if you weren't looking. That's the shortcut. But refresh is going to rewrite the screen when FrameMaker doesn't feel like rewriting it when you are ready for it to rewrite. That looks better. And now I'm just going to look and see if it's working. So here's my first level heading. It's a heading 1, and that's a 1.1. All right, there's my first figure, figure 1.1. Looking good. Figure 1.2, so that's incrementing correctly. Table 1.1, that's incrementing correctly. 1.2. And here's figure 1.3. It's a third figure, but there was a table on heads in between. Doesn't care. Series label keeps it straight. It knows what it's doing. And as I continue down, you can see these numbers are incrementing correctly. 1.2.1, 1.2.2. Then I'm at 1.3. So it goes 1.3.1. And then here's a next level down. This is the third level down. 1.3.1.1. Steps are still in here, and they're fine because they're using a different series label or perhaps no series label. They're not being impacted at all by all this other stuff because these all have series labels. Yep, everything is working perfectly. So that means that I was able to get the logic figured out and then implemented. So you can see what I did here using this table to set it up. And now I'm ready to tell the other chapters that they need to use the same numbering. And of course, in FrameMaker, we don't have to do things ever more than once. We can share formatting. So I'm going to now go over to operating limitations, which does not have any numbering in it. You can see that there's no numbering. I'll also check out systems, no numbering. And then I'm going to select those 2 chapters. And if you had 10 chapters, you would select all 10 of them, highlight all the rest of the chapters once you get the first one set up, and you import the formatting. So that command is File, Import, Formats. And I want to import from the file called General Description. That's where all the numbers are. And if I need a file to look exactly like another file, I have everything checked. That's a safe way to go. In this example, I'm only changing the numbering. That's all I'm changing, nothing else. So I can safely deselect all and just say, hey, FrameMaker, copy the paragraph styles over from general description to the 2 selected files. This is the one I'm copying from. These are the ones I'm copying to. And when I pick import, it's going to copy those numbers in, and you can see they're already done. So here's systems. Systems has chapter 1, 1.1, 1.1.1, 1.1.2. Operating systems is also doing the exact same thing that the other one did. Chapter 1, 1.1, 1.1.2. And that's fine because FrameMaker files all want to be chapter 1. They all want to be the one and only file in your life. And my tip to my students is let them all be chapter 1 while you're working at the document level. When you get to the book level, that's when you're going to tell them to number consecutively. So let me make sure you can see the beginning of this file, which currently says Operating Limitations Chapter 1. Here's Systems. Let me get you back up to the top. Chapter 1 Systems. They all think they're Chapter 1. But these 2 are not Chapter 1. So in my book window, I just select the rest of the chapters in my book from chapter 2 to the end of all the chapters you might have. And then I would right click and I would go to numbering. And I would tell the chapters that they need to continue from the previous chapter in the book. And while I'm here, I can see the page numbers think they're all page 1. I can see that at the bottom of my book window. I can see at the bottom of this file. May as well take care of that now too, and go to page numbers and say, and the page numbers need to continue from the previous page in the book. Good to know, but I'm really more focused on paragraph numbering in this webinar. So I'm going back to chapter. Make sure the chapters know to increment. Now they do. And when you pick set, they've updated. And you can see now that they know exactly where they're supposed to be. If I go back to operating limitations, it's chapter 2, 2.1, 2.2, 2.2.1, 2.2.2. When I get to systems, chapter 3, 3.1, 3.1.1, 3.1.2. So that logic we use to set up the first chapter works for all the chapters. The key is to go to the book and tell the book that you want to increment. I don't recommend doing it in the documents. That's where things get confusing. Just do it at the book level. It will always work. So this is looking really great. Now, the last thing I want to do is just look at my table of contents to finish this off. So I do have a table of contents. I'm going to go ahead to the table of contents. It doesn't have any numbers. And you might be thinking, well, she hasn't updated the book yet, and I haven't. So I will update the book. And after I click update, I still don't have any numbers, because in a new default table of contents, which if you're doing a new project and setting up from scratch, that's what you're going to have. FrameMaker doesn't want to put the chapter numbers in there. And so the final piece is to consider adding them to your table of contents. They're already in the files. The files know what the numbers are. Just tell the table of contents what to do. So here's the final piece. I'm going to go to my reference pages, because got to be in the document though. Document reference pages. And I'll go look for the table of contents reference page. Here it is. And this is the building block for the chapter titles. I just need to add the word chapter and tell it to grab the chapter number. And you can see, you eventually memorize how to spell these building blocks because we need them all the time. So chapter, chapnum, I think I need a colon space here. And then for these guys, I just need the paragraph number. That's $, para, num, and then I didn't have punctuation, so I need a space. And then this guy, I need to also add paranum. That's $, paranum. I need to add a space. That colon might be extra. I'm not sure. We'll find out in a minute. It's easy to fix it. I did talk about how to create a table of contents in the last webinar of 2022. And the next webinar in 2023 this year is going to be more on generated files. So if you're looking for more information on generated files and how these reference pages work, go back and watch the last one and come back and watch the next one. But what I'm doing is this is my heading 0 TOC. I'm putting chapter in front of it and the chapter number. And for these, this is the heading 2 and this is the heading 1. I'm just saying to put the paragraph numbers in there. So I think I'm good. Let's go find out. I'll go to the view menu and go to the body pages. And I went over the rules of generated files on the last webinar. And one of the rules is that reference page changes don't take effect until you update your book. So if you think you did it and you don't see it, it's because you haven't updated your book yet. Let's pick update. See what comes in. Yeah, it's great. To hide the text symbols so you can better see what's going on, I'm going to go to View Menu, Text Symbols, and you can see the table of contents because we told it on the reference pages is adding the word chapter and collecting the chapter numbers automatically. And then it's also pulling in the paragraph numbers from these various paragraphs. So this is looking great. I'm going to go back to general description, which is where we did all of our work, and go back to page 1. And as I begin to wrap this up, I want to remind you that I find that table to be very helpful because it helps me get organized and figure out what it is I need to do. The more complex the numbering, the more I need a table like this. I use the columns to help me figure out what's a hold and what's an increment and how many levels I have to remember. That makes it super easy. And then I just threw in the table of contents at the end because I get that question so much. I want to give you a chance to make sure you remember how it works. So I think we're done with numbering properties in FrameMaker. I'm teaching this on fall release 2022. This hasn't changed for years. This will work in any of your current versions of FrameMaker, just like this. As long as you have the chapter number variable, which showed up, I don't know, 15 years ago, you're good to go. And then before I say goodbye, I want to remind you that I'm Barb Binder, and I do have a company called Rocky Mountain Training. We have a 2-day intro class on FrameMaker, a 2-day advanced class on FrameMaker, public classes that are relatively inexpensive to attend. We also do group training, and I do one-on-one coaching. A lot of my FrameMaker students, and more FrameMaker than anything else that I do, more than InDesign or Photoshop or Illustrator, my FrameMaker users will sometimes come back for an hour or two a few times a year to ask me FrameMaker questions. That's definitely a service I offer. Reach out if you're interested. And then all the ways to stay in touch are listed below all that. There's my email and my website, and my blog is there as well. However, your single best place to get answers from any of these, the quickest way, not best, but perhaps, but the quickest way, is to go to the Adobe Community Forums. Just Google Adobe FrameMaker Forum, Forum. You'll get to the FrameMaker Forum. I'm one of several people that are on there every single day answering questions, and the other ones are just as strong in FrameMaker as I am. It's a great place to get quick answers. We are spread across the world. We're in different time zones. So the quickest place to get an answer is just to go to the community forums. Okay, thank you all so much for coming, and I wish you the very best in your FrameMaker adventures.